I think now we can move into the final session on the pupils. So we've almost saved the most important till last. Without pupils, there would be no schools. Without staff and without parents, there would be no schools. But we would not have much to do if there weren't pupils there for us to teach. So we'll finish the session today, and really really excited to be joined again by Ben. Ben and I have been in this together all afternoon, but also by Roisin McEvoy from Iona Forde and Evelyn Forde. Roisin, why don't you unmute yourself and do a little intro?
Thank you. I've gone into a different room to present and started sneezing, so I'm not sure what's causing that. So I hope I'm gonna remain with you and not have to turn my camera off and disappear. I'm Roisin McEvoy. I work at the children's mental health charity Iona Forde. For people who don't know us, we work to combine areas of research, clinical practice and training around children's mental health and well-being and lots of other aspects of inclusion. And the area that I work in particular is trying to work out some of the best ways of sharing the evidence that we have about what works in terms of children's well-being and young people's well-being with school staff in ways that make sense for schools. Because I suppose I want to emphasize before we go any further that, and I'm sure this has come up across the day, that lots of this work around, what makes school really effective in terms of the experience for children and young people, can't be done by schools on their own. I suppose what I want to say, Iona, is everything that I'm going to say next needs to come with the caveat of schools are being asked to do more and more around well-being, but actually we need as kind of whole communities and whole systems to provide the support to schools to do that. So I hope that in some ways the work of Iona Forde does that. So that's who I am.
Lovely, thank you. And Evelyn, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. So just for clarity, my name's Evelyn. I'm Evelyn Forde. I am a former head teacher. I've been in education for 26 years, feels like forever. But yeah, former head teacher, stepped back from frontline headship in the summer of 2023. But obviously during my time as a head and just kind of being at the chalk face, very much aware of the challenges that everybody, all the groups that you've spoken about, Iona, where you've spoken about staff and parents and the challenges that some young people are facing. So very much in tune with what those experiences are. And now in my role as an executive consultant in leadership spaces, I go into lots of schools. I work with lots of trust leaders and head teachers and staff, and I'm just hearing what it feels like to be a pupil in schools, and some of those challenges that are then kind of thrown up for staff and parents alike. I'm a trustee of Education Support, which is the only charity that really focuses on all staff in terms of their well-being, and I'm very much an advocate that we need our staff to be well to ensure that our children can also be well in schools. So that's just a bit of a flavour in terms of who I am.
Thank you very much, Evelyn. And Ben, do you want to do a quick intro and then we can go straight into the data?
I can, yeah. So my name is Ben. I'm insights lead at Ajurio, and I worked on all three of these annual reports that found most of the data that we've talked about within this session, as well as most of the thought leadership that we produce at Ajurio, as that is my role. So anything data related, I can talk for days about, which I'm going to do now when it comes to pupil data. I have spoken about the parent and the staff so far, and now we get to talk about the pupil data, which the pupil data set that this is based on 231,000 responses of pupils from schools that we have worked with in England. So that consists of around 57,000 primary pupils and around 157 secondary pupils, as well as a data set of pupils from all through schools and also from sixth form schools. So when we're looking at that data from a national perspective, all of those groups are included. We'll spend a bit of time today looking at primary and secondary, as we have the survey is split between a primary experience survey, and we've got a secondary pupil experience as well, because we've worded some of those questions slightly differently to make them easier to understand for the different age groups. One thing to note about the data set that it's based on, we are less represented in the Northeast, but we have a really good representation across the rest of the country when it comes to our data set. So it's just a caveat to bear in mind when we're looking at that pupil data. The overall experience in pupil for pupils for the last academic year has improved, but there are still some clear issues which we'll touch on today. We'll look at some of those areas of challenge that have remained within those. The experience changes vastly by age. We'll see a trend. I'm not going to spoil anything by explaining what that trend is, but we'll see a trend within that data that is consistent for most of the questions that we look at when we're looking at it by age. And there is also the experience differences when we look at it by gender as well, which we'll also look at with the data for today. We're also going to take a look at some of the open answer questions and the answers to those open answer questions that we have, which are pupils talking about where they're grateful for stuff within schools and things they'd like to see areas of improvement of. The overall experience for pupils is experience, and like I said, and if we look at this is data from the CST report that we published. I touched on this slightly in the staff section that we touched on this morning. We can see that quality of education is a top priority for schools and trusts after financial. So in 2024, there was a slight change in the top two, where we saw that improving quality of education dropped from being a top priority for schools and trusts to being a second top, and it's remained a second top priority for this academic year. So when we're looking at it from a strategic level, we are seeing that the improving quality of education is quite high, and we can see that pupil outcomes is the fourth highest on that one on there as well. So we do see that pupils appearing in the top 5 priorities, which is unsurprising when we're thinking about the responsibilities that schools and trusts have to pupils within this data. So what we're going to look at first, very similar to the previous layout of the data from the other two sessions, is we're going to have a quick look here at where we see those improvements. So I spoke previously about the statistical significance of the differences. So 2%, when we're looking at a data set of around 200,000 pupils, is quite a significant change when we're looking at the changes over time. We can see here that this is for primary pupils. We can see that there has been a positive improvement in the percentage of pupils feeling rarely or never worried, and for rarely or never feeling lonely. So when it comes to those measures of kind of like well-being or how they're feeling with their mental physical health, we can see that there has been an improvement for those specific questions. When we're looking further here, we've got the questions kind of around behaviour or the behaviour policies of the school, or how often do you follow the school rules? There has been a self-reported positive response improvement there, and also we've seen that the improvement in how often do pupils feel that teachers help them do better at school. So those are the areas where we saw the biggest positive changes within the primary pupil experience. There were some minimal negative changes when we're looking at the primary data, with 1% of pupils less likely to report that they read books outside of school, and also the 1% negative change in how well pupils report sleeping at night from a primary perspective. When we're looking at this from a secondary perspective, we can see here there's a variety of areas that have seen an improvement, and these ones we're seeing 3% and 2% improvements for these questions. So we're seeing that pupils report feeling better physically and mentally. They're feeling more comfortable speaking English in class. When something is difficult, how often do you keep trying to solve it? So that resilience when it comes to the curriculum, we're seeing that positive improvement. And do they know someone who's been bullied in the past 3 months? We're seeing an improvement in the percentage of pupils that report saying no to that question as well. One of the trends that we do see within all three of the stakeholder surveys is an improvement around behaviour. So staff perceptions of behaviour, parents reporting that they're feeling more informed about behaviour, and then we've also got a slight improvement here with the percentage of pupils in secondary reporting that they aren't seeing someone else in school being bullied, and we'll see some of those other questions in a second around pupil behaviour. Pupils are less likely to learn about pupils like them in class. So when we asked the question in our secondary pupil survey, how often do you learn about people like you in class? So that's like pupils with a similar background or identity to theirs. There's a 4% negative change in the responses to that, with only 16% of pupils, reporting that they rarely or never and about pupils like their class. If we look at the question here, how often do your teachers ask you to read for your studies? We see a 2% negative change in the responses to that. And how often do you get a chance to improve on the work that you need to improve? Again, a 2% negative change in that one. We also see here a negative change in how clearly secondary pupils report that their teachers explain the work that they set clearly.
Ben, I just want to jump in. You misrepresented slightly the question on learning about. So where we've got -4%, how often do you learn about people like you in class? You said 16% rarely or never.
16%
the other way
do.
around. 16% have learned
about people that represent them.
Yeah. So the stat is. I wanted to interrupt.
The opposite way around.
Yeah, the opposite way around, and really, really important, and really, not a great stat, I think. Please carry on.
So 1 in 5 did in the previous one, and that's 16% reported that they learned about people like them in class with a similar background or identity to them. Apologies for that misrepresentation at that point. So similar to the pupil session the parent session that we just did, we can see here the difference in the modules and the changes since 2023-2024 academic year. So what we can see here is that for primary there are no modules that show a clear negative, like worsening results. There are some that have mixed results, so learning and curriculum. So there are some areas of the learning curriculum results that have negative changes. Same with the health and emotional well-being. When we look at secondary, there are 3 areas where we do see the majority of questions worsening within those modules. We can see the learning process, curriculum, and assessment. We see when we look at those modules overall, there's a bigger percentage where we see improvements across questions than we do those that have worsening results. But it's important to consider those that have got the worsening results, as we just seen in some of those questions here. These questions here are from those modules that we see with the worsening results within the secondary section, so relating to the improvements within chance to work on what they have to improve, how clearly the teacher explain the work they've set, falling within the curriculum and assessment modules of those. So the experience changes vastly with age. We can see that there's differences between the primary and the secondary experience, but when we look at that within the questions here, so we're going to take a look at it to begin with the pupil happiness. The primary question is, how happy are you at school? For primary, we can see that experience gets worse for pupils the older they get. So we can see that 81% of pupils report that they're happy at school in year 3, but by the time we get to year 6, we've got 71%. When we go into secondary, we can see that there's a drop there between year 6 to year 7 of 57% of pupils report that they're happy studying at their school, with a decrease then in year 8. It's remaining relatively consistent across years 9, 10, and 11, with an improvement when they enter the sixth form years or additional study of years 12 and 13. So we do see that drop off between primary and secondary. With this trend here, you can see that negative drop off with the age through primary as well. Secondary boys, so the data we've got for gender on all of these slides is secondary data. So we can see that secondary boys are more likely to report feeling very or quite happy compared to their female friends or other pupils within school. And we've got similarly, we've got it worsening for those with another gender identity of only 25% of pupils with another gender identity reporting feeling very or quite happy to be studying at their school. When it comes to pupil engagement and interest in school, this also decreases with age. So we can see that that trend that I said I wasn't going to spoil, we can see it starting to emerge here with the pupils reporting that they're less interested, they're finding their lessons less interested the further they go through primary, with 72% in year 3, dropping for pupils in year 4 and year 5, and then down to 53% of pupils in year 6 reporting that they find their lessons interesting. If we then look at the drop off between year 6 and year 7, it has been widely reported by other studies as well that we find that change in engagement and interest and happiness within year 6 and year 7. We see the similar trend where we can see that 32% of year 7 pupils report finding what they learn at school interesting, dropping when they get to year 8. Again, in year 9, 10, and 11, it's remaining fairly consistent with the pupils in year 8. And then that increase when they get to year 12 and year 13 with those. When we're looking at the data by gender for secondary pupils, we see that female pupils are less likely to report finding lessons interesting compared to male counterparts. And 18% of pupils with another gender identity report finding their lessons interesting. Looking at safety, so the safeguarding element, the focus of this data that we'll look at is how safe do you feel in school for primary? That is relatively consistent for primary. So we see 69% in year 3, 64 year 4, 64 year 5, and 69 in year 6. Then when we look at secondary, how safe do you feel during class? 67% report feeling safe in year 7, slight decrease in year 8. And then as we see for here, we see that slightly increases as we go through year 9, year 10, and 11. And then that jump when we're looking at sixth form pupils here. So pupils in year 12 and 13. When we're looking at the levels of safety, how safe they report feeling by gender, we see that female pupils are less likely to report feeling safe compared to male pupils, but those with another gender identity are considerably less likely to report feeling safe during class. Secondary pupils are less likely to find instruction clear. We can see that between the difference between those two graphs there. You've got around 86% of year 6 pupils reporting that their teachers can explain what they work on in class quite well. When we look at secondary, we've got how clearly do your teachers explain the work they set. There we can see that drop off of 60% of pupils in year 7 reporting that the teachers explain the work they set quite clearly, with a drop off in year 8 remaining fairly consistent within year 9 and 10 and 11, and then that improvement within year 12. But that is less of an increase than we have seen in other questions between that year 11 to year 12 jump that we see. But on the whole there, we can see that the difference between primary and secondary is quite substantially different there in those. When we look at this question by gender, again, that trend that we've seen with female pupils reporting that they're less likely to find instruction clear than male pupils, and those with another gender identity are considerably less likely to report finding instruction clear. So the experience of those with another gender identity is proportionately less. If we're looking at the responses to the open answer questions for primary pupils. So in their own words, we asked them responses to the question, what is the best thing about your school? We can see three trends that emerge. So high levels of support. Quite a lot of the responses for this one showed that pupils were showing gratitude for the high levels of support in school. So we can see two examples of some of those responses there. The staff in general, they're really helpful. They make me feel like I can talk to someone. We have a blog coming out in a couple of weeks' time, which talks about the trusted adult stuff, and it's really interesting there that we see that showing through within this data here that shows that staff that they are really showing that gratitude and appreciation of the support that is available within the school communities. And the second one, we can see that actually they're talking about the general community. It's not just the staff that they are appreciative of. They're also appreciative of the support and the community around them when it comes to students and the working environment as well. We see that the teacher support showing through and kindness in positive environments there showing through as two of the other key trends within the open answers there. They're reporting that they are really grateful of the nice people in their school and the general feeling of care amongst their peers. So what we can see here is that the overall experience is improving, but like we said beforehand, there are some clear issues remaining in regards to the negative changes around the negative changes and worsening results in the modules such as curriculum and assessment and for secondary. And then we're also seeing that the experience changes vastly with age, so that the approach isn't always one approach fits all for pupils, and it needs to take into consideration age when we're looking at some of the responses to these questions, as well as gender. And in their own words, pupils are really grateful of the support and the relationships that they build in school. And I think that's a really nice message to finish the data on, is that pupils really do appreciate you taking the time to invest in them and their learning, their development within schools, and that shows through in those open answer responses.
Thank you very much, Ben. I just before we move to the discussion, I just want to mention something that's not in this report and explain why. In our survey, we also capture data on pupils' ethnicity. We don't ask every single pupil. We only ask of the older year groups, but that does mean we do have an enormous data set still on what this experience looks like for pupils of different ethnicities. The reason why this isn't in the national report and the reason why this isn't in the webinar today is when we're looking at the national level, there isn't a clear pattern that we're able to discern. So from one question, the sort of most positive to least positive groups looks one way. The next question, it changes around. What I think is really important for us to think about here, we're able to talk about age and gender because those characteristics aren't going to be impacted by what school you're at. So you'll be in year 7 in this school, you'll be in year 7 in that school, and likely the mix would be relatively similar. But when it comes to ethnicity, one school might have a really, really different characteristic makeup to another school. So the moment we look at it through the national lens, we're talking about a pupil of one ethnicity in a school where they're in the majority, and with that same pupil in a different school, they might be in the minority. And I think there's a follow-up piece of research that we haven't yet done, but I think looking at this through the lens of whether or not that pupil is in the majority or the minority within their school, I think is really important. And if we look at the gender question, we are able to capture the data on pupils who have another gender identity. Unsurprisingly, it's a much smaller group than those who identify as a girl or a boy, but there's over 1,000 pupils in our data set that identify as another gender identity, and you can see the huge difference in that experience for that minority group. So yeah, ethnicity isn't in here because if we presented this and said there's no trend, I think there would be a risk there that we would be misinterpreting what's going on, and as I say, more research, more analysis to come. With that in mind, well, not just with that in mind, but all of this in mind, Roisin, I think I'll come to you first. Love to hear from you from all the research that you do at Iona Freud. How does this story fit with what you're seeing in the wider research?
Well, I think we know that certainly the story around transitions fits with the wider picture that we understand from lots of different sources, that the move from primary to secondary school is certainly presenting challenges for young people and also for the adults who are teaching them and leading their schools. I suppose one of the things that interested me was the positive uplift in year 12, which I think might give us a hint about some of what might be going on here for young people in terms of why aspects like happiness might appear to decline or improve at certain points in school life. And my hunch is that this is something to do with core psychological needs that we all have in order to feel well, and that I guess are the business of school, but that are perhaps manifested differently in the different phases in education. So we know that one of the things that we really need to feel happy and to feel well in ourselves is a sense of autonomy. And that might match quite well with this pattern that we see of perhaps a greater sense of autonomy in primary school and in year 12, and perhaps a less autonomous experience for children in the early years of secondary school. Similarly, the need to feel competent. And I think we talked about this, Iona, when we discussed these results when you first find them, that there's this real kind of, when you first shared them with me, this real connection between engagement and interest and feeling competent. I guess what we mean by that is that I'm able to do the things that I know I need to do. So autonomy is about I have choices, I am able to make choices that are in line with my values, and then feeling competent is that I can kind of act on those choices in a way that makes sense to me. And I guess some of the engagement findings maybe point to this with young people in secondary school, again, describing these sort of very low levels of feeling interested in what they're learning. So there appears to be something going on there. I mean, my other sort of big response to all of this is that it is brilliant that so many children are getting this opportunity, and that we've actually moved to a place now where we understand that this right to have your views heard is a really important right for young people. And I suppose to kind of, even though we might be picking up on some things that we're hearing that are negative and that we want to act on because we feel like these are not good experiences in some ways, the really important part of this is that we're listening, and then we're also giving due weight to these views and trying to understand what they might tell us about school experience and what schools can do about some of these things. I mean, school can't be entirely responsible for a child's happiness, but I think there are things that can make us feel well, that can make us feel happy, that schools perhaps have control over. And that is proved in what happens in year 12. Those moments, that's another moment of transition where we're actually getting an uplift in a lot of these measures. So those were some of the things that kind of interested or struck me.
Lovely, thank you. And Evelyn, you've got a wonderful CV, and you've worked both in kind of within a school and also now wider, looking across multiple schools. What's your reflection on this data?
Yeah, I think obviously we need to celebrate that there is an uptick in some areas. I think we need to celebrate that. But there is a tension between progress and persistence. And I just think that, building on from what Roisin said, in terms of happiness, well-being, and that sense of autonomy. Totally kind of get that where you can see an uptick. But I would link the happiness to also that kind of sense of belonging in a school. And that I do think schools are responsible for. I think the responsibility for making young people feel like deeply feel like they're part of a school, not just my name's on the register, like deeply feel I belong in this school. I don't think it's something that it's not a feeling that pupils should have to manufacture. I think it's an outcome that leaders are responsible for designing and making sure that they are totally aware of what that means. And interesting around the stat, and I just want to make sure I've got the stats right on this one. Only 16% of pupils see themselves reflected in the curriculum, which therefore 84% do not, right? And I think there's a big piece of work there. And yes, we've had a curriculum review. Disappointing that the curriculum drafters are not diverse in terms of representation. So there's a real, for me, there's that tension and that lack of understanding. What does it really mean for our diverse communities to feel like they really belong in a school? And if only 16% of pupils can see themselves reflected in the curriculum, well, I think that's an indictment on us as a profession. And I just think that's because if I can see myself in my learning, then that's going to feed my happiness. That's going to feed my sense of belonging. And so, my view is that until there's a real deep understanding in terms of, what does it mean for various groups, okay, various kind of demographics, and, asking the questions around, happiness, well-being, and belonging, but asking it in a way that is going to elicit the right answers. It can't be a tick box around, oh, do you feel like you belong to our school? Well, yeah, because, I'm in year 7. No. Where do you feel that sense of belonging? And, ask the questions around leadership, ask the questions around representation in terms of staffing, governance, etc., etc. So I welcome I welcome the uptick in many areas, but that tension between progress and persistence, I think, remains there. And I'm hearing it a lot as I'm going into schools, around this kind of sense of children feeling recognition and relevance. I'm hearing that a lot. There's data from the NFER that also talks about engagement and attainment closely linked to identity, relevance, and relationships. So I welcome your data. I'm heartened that you're going to do a follow-up piece of work and really drill down to ethnicities and, what does that mean for those young people? But there's still work to do, as always.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and I think where you pulled up the specific question around seeing themselves reflected in the curriculum, I think there's a few other places in the survey where we ask questions that get at belonging. One of them is around how important you think pupil voice is, and that's Roisin, you said how wonderful it is that they're being invited to have their voice. A third of pupils responded negatively to that question. They don't feel that pupil voice is particularly important in their school, and then a third said that they think it's very or quite important. So even that's at the national level, but in terms of making sure that pupils feel that their voice matters and that they have a place, which I think is really, really intrinsic in belonging, is not there. I'm going to take a moment to just I've had this book on my desk for the last few days, and I was fortunate enough to go to the launch on Saturday. Cultivating Belonging in Schools. This is a book written by Hannah Wilson, co-founder of Diverse Educators Now Belonging Effect, and it looks at across the school environment, overall belonging in society, belonging in schools, belonging in the staff room, and belonging in the classroom. There is a bit of a focus on staff as well, but I think this is a really good read, and it's small and pocket size, so you can take it with you if you need to read on the train or anything like that. Yeah, I think the transitions piece is worth us spending some time on. Roisin, you mentioned it a little bit. I'm going to come to you again and ask you to speak a little bit more about what you think is going on in transition years and what we could think about, what we can do next.
Well, I'm going to put my hands up, Iona, and say this is something we're working on at the moment, is trying to understand a bit more. So we're seeing this pattern, but I think there's something to be done around digging into what's sitting behind the pattern. So I'm actually working on a project at the moment where we're doing some focus groups with young people to talk to them about what their experience of year 7 is, and to try and dig into some of these patterns a bit more. I mean, I think Evelyn clearly is onto something with this notion of belonging. And I suppose it's not to be underestimated that actually building a feeling of belonging is not a simple thing to do. And feeling that I belong somewhere is not something that can happen instantaneously. And so for many of our children, they have had that incredible strong sense of belonging and of being known at primary school. And secondary school does present, really significant challenges. It's the challenge of new places, new people, new routines, new demands in terms of the academics. But it's also all the changes that the young person is going through because of their stage of life. And those are not to be underestimated either. So there are a lot of complex factors, I guess, contributing to that pattern that we're seeing. And I'm going to say, watch this space, because there's going to be more coming from us about this in terms of understanding what children tell us is really happening that helps or doesn't help. I think there is I was thinking about Evelyn's focus on this. Do I see myself represented in the curriculum? And I think that connection between curriculum and identity, and curriculum and belonging, may be a really important one for us to explore a bit more. It's going to be disempowering and discouraging not to see myself in the curriculum. And we know that those feelings negatively impact well-being, and they negatively impact learning. If I feel disempowered, if I feel discouraged, I'm not going to learn well. So that then in itself may also be contributing to some of these feelings around not finding things interesting, or not finding that things are well explained. I think these are all interconnected experiences. I think also, and Ben really helpfully drew our attention to the qualitative comments, because I was really fascinated by those. And I think they also connect to this piece around what makes me feel that I belong in school, or what might keep me feeling happy during this, the challenging time of transition to secondary school. Because the young people themselves, all of the things that they pinpoint, the things that Ben shared, are really things about how they value school, things related to inclusion, to relationships, to support, and to engaging activities. So in the positive things that the young people note in their qualitative comments, I think they direct us in a way to all of the things we'd want to think about. They're talking about inclusion, they're talking about relationships, and they're talking about support. So that would be my thinking, is what our focus could be. But I don't want to preempt what the young people are going to tell me over the next couple of months as we're out doing our groups with the children.
Evelyn, what do you have to say on the sense of building belonging at the transition phase?
Yeah, pretty much what Roisin was just talking about, to be honest. Because I wrote down, voice. It's about asking the children, what is it about the transition from primary to secondary? Oh no, let's flip that. Let's start by asking the children in primary, what makes you feel like you belong in primary school? Let's start there. And then once we've got that information, we then carry that through into secondary. So it's about the young people's voices. But the other thing I've just kind of written down is that we have system pressures. And I just think, I've been ahead. We do the transition, we go in, we ask a question, we write it down, we do the buddying up when they come into secondary, but we're such on a treadmill. I think it's the education landscape. We are all such on a treadmill of, accountability, other external pressures that are coming down the train tracks for school leaders, teachers, and support staff. And so I think somewhere in that, we're losing the voice of the child. And I think if a child told us in primary, Miss, this is what really makes me feel like I belong, and this, that gives me a sense of joy and happiness, and we've noted it, we then, through no fault of our own, it's just the pressures. Where do we have the time? That real, not 5 minutes in tutor time. How are you feeling today? Do you feel like you belong? That's very tokenistic. So I think teachers, I think school leaders are trying their absolute best to make sure that, if they deeply understand what belonging means, they're doing some good work around it. But I think we have got these system pressures that make that just a little bit more challenging. So I think once we get Roisin's data and the feedback, I hope that will be helpful for school leaders and teachers, so that they can kind of hang on to those messages, because we need to listen to the children and not come up with the ideas ourselves. Because I think sometimes we can come up with a framework or, these are the list of things. But actually, hey, let's do what you guys have done in terms of let's just ask the questions to the right people at the right time. And the right time feels like those transition times. But I would also, like year 6 into year 7, I would also then stop and reflect, well, looking at your data for year 12 and 13, let's ask some further questions there. Let's be asking them about belonging, happiness, transition, so that we can continue to embed that in our schools, and that it's not just a one-off that happened at the time that the data was taken. The schools are really embedding this real deep sense of belonging and a culture that is long lasting.
Yeah, I really like that. And what I think is interesting is that for a lot of the data that we look at by year group, year 7 is notably higher than year 8. And it's kind of year 8 to 11 where it's sort of low and kind of languishing. And I wonder if that's, as you said, we have system pressures, we're on a treadmill, that those sorts of things. Maybe we've only got 1 year's worth of effort and energy that we can put to this, so we're putting it in year 7 as the kind of most important first year. But actually, if we could make some changes based on whatever's working for year 12, whatever's working in primary, that could be embedded across, perhaps that would be a sort of similar resource pull, but having the impact across. I think that's a really interesting thing to consider. I'm just going to draw everyone's attention to the time. We've got just over 10 minutes left in the day. Evelyn's running a twilight session at 4, so we do have a very, very hard stop. Do add any questions in the chat if you have any for any of us. I'm going to ask another question on a different topic to both of you. Ben mentioned that this year we're seeing across all 3 stakeholder groups, parents, staff and pupils, a bit of an improvement in behaviour. So the perception of behaviour appears to be improving. I juxtapose that against what I'm reading in online and in various other sort of media outlets. What have you seen around behaviour over years? Are you seeing an improvement? Are you seeing increasing challenges? What do you think is sitting behind that sort of seemingly contradictory data? Roisin, I'll start with you again.
I think one of the things we're seeing that's really positive is better understanding of behavior, or at, at the very least, an increased interest in what we might term behavior or problematic behavior, or what that might mean for that child, or what it might mean for us as educationalists in the way that we respond to it. So I think maybe we might be seeing better responses around behavior because all of us, parents, teachers, and young people, have become more thoughtful about what we actually mean by good or bad behavior. And so that may be changing the kind of reflections that people are making in the survey, rather than that the behavior is changing so much that the way that we're understanding that behavior is changing. And I mean, I think it does connect as well to, and I think Ben, again in his presentation, gave a nod to this, that actually different groups are responding to these questions differently. So the question of safety is responded to differently by young people who identify as girls, and it's responded to differently by young people who have another gender identity than the way that boys are responding to the question around safety. So I suppose it would be quite important, Iona, to reflect that the experience is not the same, that some groups are experiencing behaviour in school differently to others, and that is reflected in the range of the answers to the questions. And that links, I guess, to other things that we know about mental health and about mental well-being. So we know that experience of discrimination, for example, because you and your family are from the global majority, we know that that's a risk factor for mental health problems. We know that being neurodivergent is a risk factor, but we also know that it doesn't have to be that way, and that actually school and experience of school can be a protective factor for our mental health. So some of these issues around the degree to which a young person is experiencing what they see as problematic behavior or bullying or not feeling safe, they really matter, but they matter to all children, but they matter to some groups more than others, I think might be something that I would reflect.
Lovely, thanks. Evelyn?
Yeah, and again, to echo kind of what Rasheen's already said, I think that there is becoming an increasing awareness of unrecognized needs, needs that haven't yet been kind of recognized. And so maybe I think the question and the data is quite controversial, if I'm honest, just in terms of, behavior's got much better, or, marginally better, because I think, when I talk to some leaders, it hasn't. So, I think there's anyway, it's slightly controversial. But what I do think is that there is more of a, okay, rather than let's immediately label as that child has a behavior problem, I think more and more of us are stopping and thinking, actually, let's just consider their needs. And so maybe coming at it at a more kind of human lens, I think might be one thing that's happening. I think because of the increase in unrecognized needs, or even young children who are being diagnosed, that there is a significant increase there. I think that actually, in terms of parents, it's giving them the confidence to express, no, my child doesn't have a behavior problem. Actually, I'm now feeling confident enough as a parent to say, actually, I think there might be some, unmet needs here. So could we have a look at that, in partnership together? So that might be why, parents are feeling more positive in terms of behaviour. But I think, overall, it's coming at it with more of a kind of a human lens that, rather than quick to label. My caveat there again will be that there will be some groups, and as Rasheen's already mentioned, I'll pick boys from the global majority, more likely to be labelled, more likely to be excluded. And so is that human lens consistent when we're talking about behaviour and unmet needs? But yeah, look, I'm heartened if the data says it's improving. Obviously, we can, always drill down a bit further. But yeah, those would be my kind of reflections on that.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think it's important again to note that this is the average
Yeah.
across and I think that one of the main kind of downsides of writing in terms of averages is it's going to put more weight to the voice of the majority because there
Yeah.
are more of the majority in that data set. So the average is it does hide those those challenges. And yeah, thanks very much for reminding us of that. I think it's really important. We've got just a few minutes left. I didn't see anyone add any questions. I'm going to pause briefly and say, please unmute yourself if you would like to ask a question to anybody now. It's hard to know how long is an appropriate time to leave it. I'm going to say that's an appropriate amount of time. So yeah, we've got just a few minutes left. Let's do a kind of closing reflection. Evelyn, I'm going to go to you first. I realised I went to Roisin first every time because I can see you on the screen, but no one else can see you on the screen because they can see me at the moment. So
No worries.
Evelyn, you give us your reflections.
Yeah. So I did write something down around engagement and age, and I think that we can see that engagement kind of declines with age. I don't think that's a motivation issue. I think it's a design issue. And I come back to the curriculum and pupils learning that feels relevant and purposeful. And I think that we had an opportunity with the curriculum review, and some recommendations came out of there, which were great. We're now into the next phase of that. And I just think it would be a shame to miss an opportunity to make sure we've got the right voices round the table that are really looking at and understand relevance and purpose in a curriculum. So that would, because like I say, you see yourself in a curriculum, it's going to breed that happiness. It's going to be that joy, that sense of pride, and it's not just it's beneficial for everybody, is my point about a real diverse curriculum. It is beneficial for every child in every school. And I would be really disappointed if we missed that opportunity right now.
Very much so. Thank you. Roisin, what are your closing reflections?
I mean, I would like to take this opportunity to build on Evelyn's idea of final reflections, because I get to follow her this time, which I feel is very lucky. Because I would absolutely agree with Evelyn. In many ways, some of the answer to this has got to be about the core business of schools, which is learning. The core business of schools is learning. And so it would be, yes, there are kind of system-wide questions to answer, but there's also the opportunity, I think, for every school leader and for every teacher indeed to reflect on what aspects of your practice or of your policy are acting against engagement or interest or that experience of clear instructions that the young people were asked about. And, is it possible in your school for a teacher to have enough flexibility to adapt lessons in real time, to use assessment in a really kind of thoughtful way, to promote that engagement from young people and to make the changes to the curriculum that it's possible to make within existing frameworks. So that would be one thing. My second would be the well-being of staff. And the training that they need. And Evelyn said this right at the very beginning, that there is a strong connection between the well-being of staff and the well-being of children. You can't think about those two things separately. And part of our well-being as educationalists is that we get appropriate training and development for the job that we have to do and for the job of being a teacher in 2026, which is different to what it might have been when I did my teacher training, Evelyn, which I think it might even have been before you. And finally, ask the young people. So you're already asking them, you're doing this survey, everybody who's on this call is already doing some really great work here because you're surveying, you're asking them. And I would say just dig deeper. ask more questions.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, both of you, and thank everybody who's stuck it out. Anyone who's been here since 1 o'clock and is still here. Excellent work. Well done on opening your mind and spending the afternoon, thinking about these big issues. I think we can start to draw the session to a close. So I'll just say an enormous thank you to Evelyn and Roisin and everybody that's been on the panel so far today, and an enormous thanks to everybody who's been on the line. We will share the slides in a follow-up email. The recordings will be available, and we've kind of peppered throughout the chat various other resources that you can download. So yeah, all that's left I think to say is thank you very much and have a lovely evening.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Bye.